This is the Iowa Gold Star Military Museum at Camp Dodge in Johnston. And this is the Sullivan Brothers Iowa Veterans Museum in Waterloo. Each stands in tribute to the thousands of Iowans who have served our country, defending her in conflicts all over the world.
It's a debt we can never repay, the debt we owe the men and women who have fought on our behalf. We see it as their bravery and heroism. They see it as simply doing their jobs to the best of their abilities.
The advancement of technology over time has changed everything, including how we fight our wars. The airplane was a new invention at the time of the First World War, but by World War II, a generation later, use of planes like the one here at the Iowa Gold Star Military Museum was standard operating procedure. Now unmanned planes drop bombs, eliminating danger to flight crews. Thanks to technology, the way we hear about war has changed as well. Radio was just a dream when the Great War was fought. By World War II, Americans huddled next to radios for news about the far-off conflict. Soon, wars came into our living rooms via television, and now it's not uncommon to see scenes from behind enemy lines live via satellite. In a time before email and cell phones, families went months without hearing from their loved one who was at war, and without knowing whether that loved one was even alive. Iowa's radio and television journalists have played unique roles in covering wars, serving as a link between the Battlefront and the Homefront. From World War II to Operation Desert Storm a half-century later, this program is about those broadcasters who followed troops into battle half a world away to bring the story of war back home to Iowans. In the depth of the Great Depression, Americans scaled back to only the essentials. It was not a time for frivolous purchases. But one item that quickly became essential in our lives was a radio. No longer merely a homemade crystal set assembled by a hobbyist, radio assumed a prime spot in the living room of most homes through its unique ability to blend entertainment and news with an immediacy traditional forms, such as newspapers, could not provide, and with a personal touch that could not be matched. The voices coming through the radio receiver made us laugh.
I mean the fellow's name on first base.
Who?
The fellow playing first base for St. Louis.
Who?
The guy on first base.
Who is on first?
Well, what are you asking me for?
Made us cry.
One man's family is dedicated to the mothers and fathers of the younger generation and to their bewildering offspring.
Frightened us.
Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The shadow knows.
Consoled us.
That the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
And made us want to get up and dance. And there were times when the voice on the radio told us that our world had changed forever.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin. The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii by air, President Roosevelt has just announced.
Men from all walks of life left their homes, jobs, and families to defend our country. One familiar voice was absent from Eastern Iowa radio for a time. R.J. McElroy hosted a daily man-on-the-street program from downtown Waterloo on WMT radio. After he was drafted into the service, Michael McElroy, as he was known on the air, regularly sent notes back to the station to be read during his midday Voice of Iowa program to help him stay connected with his WMT audience. A letter written 1 month after he joined the Army urged listeners to buy the bread made by his sponsor, so that the program will still be on the air when the war is over and I can come back and spend happy hours with you again. He also urged listeners to support the troops in every way you can, as they are doing their best to make this world a safe place for good Christian people to live in. It was signed, Yours for Victory, Michael McElroy. When war broke out, like so many others, WHO radio farm editor Herb Plambeck went to enlist. But much to his dismay, the Army rejected the 34-year-old, not once, not twice, but 7 times, due to a small spot they found on Plambeck's lung.
I got to be a war correspondent because a fraternity brother came from England, and when I told him, I said, boy, I've had a rough time. I've been turned down 7 times. He said, you mean to tell me you want to get into this army, this war? I said, yes, I do. I remember him now. He sat back in his chair. You must be crazy. I can't get you into the army or anything like that, but I can get you where the war is at. And I said, how and when?
That classmate was Francis Flood, a writer for Wallace's Farmer, who was serving in the Iowa National Guard at the time. Now, Flood did not tell Plambeck the how and when at that moment, but in June of 1943, as Plambeck was training for reserve duty with the Iowa National Guard, he received word that he was one of only 6 Americans selected to travel overseas to see England under fire and report back to Americans. He was on a plane overseas shortly after Independence Day 1943, and that led to the first international farm broadcast ever, WHO's weekly Corn Belt Farm Hour, presented from the studios of the BBC in London.
Today, radio station WHO's weekly Corn Belt Hour comes to you from across the Atlantic. The British Broadcasting Corporation is happy to cooperate with the Central Broadcasting Company in Des Moines in presenting, by transcription, this international farm program.
Hellfire Corner is that area in Kent County closest to the enemy's nearest front. It includes several thousand acres of farmland extending, in some cases, to the very edge of the famous White Cliffs of Dover.
And we were walking along, and as we were walking along, a fellow came this way. I know now it was Ed Merle. But as he came along, he was wearing a uniform, and on the uniform he had a patch, and it said war correspondent. I said, how do you get to be a war correspondent? Oh, he says, there's nothing to it. You just go here to SHAFE headquarters, PRO section. Sure enough, he was right. All you had to do was apply, provided you sent a cable to your boss, and he approved the application. Mr. Malin sent back a cable immediately. Go right, you're authorized to go ahead, provided you're back in 3 months. That was pretty good.
And just like that, war correspondent Herb Plambeck covered the U.S. Air Force until September 1943, the first Iowa broadcaster to ever cover war at the special invitation of the British government. Now that was unique. As longtime WHO News Director Jack Shelley explained, local stations were not allowed to send reporters overseas until late in the war.
But it's a strange fact that you could not, if you were an individual radio station, you could not send a correspondent overseas to be with the armed forces until the spring of 1944. For the first part of the war, after we got involved in it, they would let newspapers of almost any size send correspondents overseas, but they kept claiming they couldn't accommodate radio people. That was not quite true, but they made it stick. Finally, in 1944, they announced that you could send, if you were an individual station, a war correspondent overseas for 3 months. That's all. Newspapers were on that limit either. So our manager, a visionary man named Joe Malin, who really built the operation that WHO News, Sports, and Farm became, said, I think we ought to send somebody overseas. Whom should we send? And I said, well, you better send me, because I want to go, and if you don't send me, I might think of quitting.
Shelley himself finally arrived in London in October of 1944. Once there, he learned his ability to cover the war was going to be severely limited.
I checked in with a very officious British major who was in charge of that part of things. We were told before we left New York, we had only 3 months we could spend, we individual station correspondents. only 3 months we could spend in Europe. That's all right, I said. It's an interesting war, and 3 months ought to be enough to cover quite a bit of it. Got over there, and this British major said, "You know, don't you, you can spend only 1 month on the European mainland?" Well, that was just crushing to me. The war by now was over there on the mainland. We had D-Day. We were roughing across France, heading toward Germany. And now he's telling me I've got to spend 2 months in Britain, which, while it's got some buzz bombs and other things coming in, is not where the main war is on. He said, "You want to go right now, or do you want to stay here 2 months and then go over there?" Well, I was no dummy. I said, "I want to go right now."